In this chapter, we are going to be evaluating expressions with exponents of 0. So this whole video is going to be about exponents, and this is basically the basics for exponents in terms of the rules that you have to kind of remember as you go through these problems. I'm only going to give you guys about a couple examples each, and then you can kind of go back and use the examples as you're completing the homework, but these are the basics. And we are going to start with exponents that are 0. So for the first one, we have negative 3/2. So I'm on this one right here. We have negative 3/2 to the 0 power. And the way that I've always explained this to my students is that exponents are like zombies. They only infect the things that they touch. So just like a zombie can only infect something after it bites it or touches it, exponents work the same way. This exponent here is touching something, and what it's touching is the parenthesis. It's right next to that parenthesis. Technically, it's not touching this negative that's out front. It's touching the parenthesis, which means it's affecting everything that's inside the parenthesis. So the 3/2 is getting taken to the 0 power. But that negative that's out front here is actually not getting touched by the 0. So the rule for exponents of 0 is as follows. For example, maybe we should start with this one over here. The 0 is touching the 4, so the 4 is affected. Anything that a 0 touches turns into a 1. Since 4 is the only thing out here, it's being affected by that 0. The answer to this one is 1. That's the answer to that one over there. Let's go back to this one over here. Everything that the 0 touches turns into a 1, so it doesn't really matter what was in the parenthesis here. All of this stuff just turns into a 1. That negative out front actually was not touched, so the negative is still going to be there. That wasn't affected by that 0. And everything inside the parentheses got turned into a 1. So the answer to this one is -1. One more time if we look at it from the beginning again. The 3/2 turns into a 1 because it's inside the parentheses, which is being touched by the 0. Everything that is 0 exponent touches turns into a 1. And then the negative is not inside the parentheses, so that is not going to change. That's just going to be out front. Let's move on to the next one. On this one, we have the same type of thing where we have a fraction inside of parentheses. The parentheses is being taken to the exponent of 0. So everything inside the parentheses, it doesn't really matter that it's 8/9. It's going to turn into a 1. The -1 or the -3 out front, that's not even inside the parentheses, so that is actually going to stay there. And it was being multiplied. So -3 times 1 is what we're left with. That -3 is being multiplied by the stuff inside the parentheses. But that stuff inside the parentheses, like I said, turned into a 1. So all of this stuff that I'm crossing out is what turned into that 1. -3 times 1, it's just -3. I don't think that's where that was supposed to go, but that's where I'm going to put it. On the next one, we have 4/5 taken to the 0 power. Again, it doesn't matter what's in here because inside the parentheses, it's all getting affected by that 0. It's all turning into a 1. And again, that -3 that's out front is not being affected. So that -3 is going to stay there. It's being multiplied. -3 times 1 is -3. So I'm going to take a minute here and just erase everything so you can look one more time at the answers and how the questions were originally set up. Those are your answers. I would go through and make sure you have all of those before you move on to the next part. We are going to move on, and now we are going to evaluate expressions with negative exponents. So let's start over here on the right-hand side with this 8 to the -2nd power. And our rule for negative exponents is that all we have to do if if the 8 is on top of a fraction, which technically it is, this is technically 8 over 1. 8 is the same thing as 8 over 1. We have that negative 2 exponent. The only thing we have to do is basically take that negative exponent and the base and move them to the other side of the fraction. So if it starts on top, it's going to move to the bottom. If it starts on the bottom, like it is over here, we're going to end up moving it to the top. And after we've moved it, the exponent is no longer a negative, it becomes a positive. So let me show you how this works. Right now, if we wanted to write this out, we could say this is the same thing as 8 to the negative second power over 1. And it's really just a one-step problem here. Our final answer, the 8 is actually going to move to the bottom. The negative 2 that we had up in our exponent is changing to a positive 2. And on top, we are going to have a 1. Whenever you move something to the bottom and there's nothing left on top, we're just going to keep that 1 up there. This is our final answer for this problem. Okay, moving over to the other one. Now we have something on the bottom, we're going to move it up to the top. If I move this up to the top, a couple things happen again. First of all, I'll write the 5. That exponent is no longer negative. Once you move it to the other side of the fraction, it's no longer negative. So we have 5 to the second power on top. And on the bottom, since there's nothing left on the bottom, we moved it up. We can just put a 1 down there. Now, anytime that you have a 1 on the bottom as your final answer, you don't really need it. So we could just write 5 to the second power. And if you know what 5 to the second power is, that's just 25. So our final answer for the first one there, we could simplify it all the way to 25. I should have maybe simplified the other one as well. You can do that. If I wanted to simplify this, I could say it's 1 over 64. But the main idea is knowing this and what I had highlighted over here on this side too. And then you can simplify it more if you want to. But let's move on to the next part. Evaluating an expression with a negative exponent. Let's see. So now, like I said before, the negative 1 is infecting everything that it touches. So this is actually going to bring into another rule that we haven't really talked about yet, but that's okay. We'll just go with this. The negative 1 is infecting everything inside the parentheses. It's right outside the parentheses, so that's what it's touching. So everything inside the parentheses, which is the 8 and the 9, the 8 and the 9 are both in there, they're both going to get affected by that negative 1. So if I were to rewrite this, this is how I would rewrite it. The 8 gets a piece of the negative 1, and the 9 gets a piece of the negative 1, just like that. Now, like I said, we need to flip things on the other side like we did up here. If it started on the bottom with a negative exponent, like we have right here, that's going to have to go to the top. And the top one is going to have to go to the bottom. So to do that, I'm just going to draw my fraction line. I like to draw the fraction line first. And then I'll put my 9 on the top and my 8 on the bottom. And now both of those exponents, the 9 had a negative 1, that'll become a positive 1. The 8 will have a positive 1 exponent as well. We don't really need those 1s as exponents, so I can just put my final answer as 9 over 8. And that is it for that one. Let's move on to the next one. On this one, everything inside the parentheses is being taken to that negative 2 exponent. So 7 gets a piece of the negative 2. 5 gets a piece of the negative 2. And we are going to need to flip these things around now. So the 5 goes to the top, and that becomes a positive 2. The 7 goes to the bottom, and that also becomes a positive 2. And you could simplify this more. You could expand it and get 25 on the top, and you could get 49 on the bottom, and you could rewrite your answer as 25 over 49. I kind of ran out of room, so I'm not going to do that. let's go on to the next one. Now it says we're going to rewrite an algebraic expression without a negative exponent. Basically, we do not want in our answers at any point a negative exponent. Nowhere in our answers do we want a negative exponent. So the only ones that I see in this first problem is right here. There's only one negative exponent. This goes back to my previous question. What is that exponent touching? Some people might say, okay, I can see that it's touching the z, which I would agree with. It is touching the z. But is it touching the 2? And the answer to that is no, or the negative 2, I should say. It's not touching the negative 2. It's only touching the z. If it was going to be touching the negative 2, we would have to have parentheses around that saying that the negative 2 goes to everything inside the parentheses, but it's not. It's only touching the z. So therefore, when I rewrite this, the negative 2 is just going to stay at the bottom where it is. But the z is going to move to the top because we have to get that negative exponent out of there. And so that would become a positive 2 instead. And we are done. Now some of you might be wondering, well, what happened to that 1 that we had on top? Well, technically that's still there, but you would say it's 1 times z, and we don't really need to say 1 times z. We don't need to put that in our answer. So this is our final answer, and I can rewrite it because it's a little sloppy, but my final answer was z to the 2nd power over negative 2. The negative 2, again, wasn't affected by that exponent, so that's just going to stay on the bottom. And that's a big key. That's something you need to really look out for. That negative 2 on the bottom was not affected by that exponent. Let's move on to the last one. We have negative 6 v to the negative 5th on the bottom. And I'll ask the same question, see if you can get this. What is this negative 5 really affecting? It's affecting the v, and that's it. It's not affecting the 6. It's not touching the 6. There's no parentheses saying that it's going to go to both of those. So this 6 that I'm highlighting right now, the negative 6, is going to stay where it's at. So my final answer, I can already kind of move to the final answer here. I know that that negative 6 is going to stay on the bottom. It's not moving anywhere. The v is going to have to go up top, though. And that 5 is going to become positive. Every time you take something from the bottom and move it to the top, the exponent changes to the opposite sign. So since we had a negative 5 on the bottom, we moved it to the top, it became a positive 5. I'm going to highlight my answer here.